Hello, Bible scholars. We are in St. Louis at the seminary, and I am so excited because I know at the end of the year, many of my students, they're curious about what about other world religions and when can we learn about that? And we don't necessarily have time for that in class specifically, but I thought we could go deeper with an expert in world religions and someone who can tell us about their travels. So, Dr. Chitwood, would you please introduce yourself to us?
Yeah, I'm Ken Chitwood, and I'm a professional religion nerd. So that's what I get to do for a living.
A religion nerd. So,
Yeah,
what was life like for you when you were 14 years old?
that's a great question because I was growing up in Los Angeles, and I think that's pretty central to the story of why I became a professional religion nerd, someone who gets paid to explore the diversity of religions across the globe. And that's because my friends were Muslim and Hindu, they were Jewish and different types of Christian, they were atheist, agnostic, and somewhere in between. My first girlfriend was Wiccan. So I was constantly either dating my way through the world's religions or I was encountering the world's religions through my friendships, my relationships that meant so much to me at that age. And the input I was getting from my church was super helpful for my own faith and growth, but not necessarily to help me understand the faith of others.
So, it's important to study other religions, would you say?
For sure, yeah.
What would be the most important things for us as we have people who are believers and people who don't know anything about religions? What are the benefits of studying world religions?
I mean, you get to know the world through religions. 83% of the world's population identifies with a particular religious tradition, and the other 17% may have a range of different spiritual perspectives, beliefs. They may cobble together different religious traditions that they've encountered or that they like. And so the vast majority of the world's people are religious, but the vast majority of the people of the world are not necessarily Christian. And so if you grow up Christian, you know only a small subset of the world's religious diversity. And I like to quote one of the founders of the world of religious studies said, to know only one religion is to know none, because you also learn about your own faith and your own religious tradition in a different way when you start to encounter the religions of others. And so it's a mutual growth process. You not only learn more about the world, you learn more about yourself.
Well, and biblically, we are to, like, God loves the world, and so
Yeah.
we should also love the world, and that means knowing about the world.
Yeah.
You've traveled quite a bit, and my students wanted to know what is some of the most interesting encounters you've had with different cultures in your travels, and maybe tell us a little overview of some of your travels.
I've been able to travel to over 40 different countries around the world and enjoyed something from everywhere I've gone. My favorite thing is I've been able to live in a few different countries. I've lived in New Zealand and in South Africa, in Germany, and in Texas. So I've learned to kind of grow and adapt to each place I've gone and kind of fallen in love with each of those places and their particular takes on food or their takes on dress or their takes on what it means to be a human in the world. And I've enjoyed something from everywhere. But in my line of work, which is anthropology of religion, we talk about making the strange familiar and the familiar strange. And one of the things that I didn't expect through this process is when I went to strange places, they became more familiar and more beloved by me. But then when I came back to the United States, that familiar place had become increasingly strange to me. And I started to see it not as just a normal place, but as a weird place with its own traditions, its own ways of doing things. And so I've also re-encountered home in a way that I never expected I would. But yeah, I live in Germany these days, so Germany is probably my favorite place at the moment because it's home. Yeah.
That's so fun. What are some of those small things that happen when home becomes unfamiliar? An example I can think of is my daughter is at Concordia University in California, Irvine. And when she came back to Nevada, it was strange to her that there were bags in the grocery store because, in California, there's no bags at the grocery store. You have to bring your own. And I know that's very common in Europe. Are there things like that you can think of that are just like weird particulars?
Yeah, I mean, people talk about this thing called culture shock, and we think, oh, it's, the big things of cultural differences that are going to really shock you. And those, I think, we're, as human beings, pretty trained to deal with. We know that there's massive difference in the world, and we've seen it, especially nowadays with everything on the internet. We're very familiar with the world and its difference. But it's the little subtle things that tend to bring about kind of deep existential, like, who am I questions. And for example, I mean, last night I was out to dinner at a restaurant here in St. Louis, and I was stressed out with how much the server was coming up to our table. Because in Germany, they came up, they get your order, they maybe bring your order or someone else does, and then you don't see them, and you're going to have to track them down when you want to pay. And so here it was like 20 times they were at the table, and I felt like I couldn't get a conversation going. I felt constantly interrupted. I felt stressed out about making choices, and I was like, I'm freaking out a little bit here. And I was like, no, I missed this as well, because customer service is something that's extremely valued in the United States. And so I also tried to lean into it. And I think it's those little things that kind of get you more than the big cultural differences in any way, like language or dress or all that. Yeah.
No. Okay. Going along with this, a very important question one of my students wanted to ask is, in your experience, what's the best cheese you've ever had? Which I was like, oh, that's not a bad question.
Best cheese.
Now, are you a cheese enjoyer?
I am. Paula, who's my wife, she enjoys cheese far more than I do. There's kind of a love affair there with cheese and Paula, and I try not to get in the way of that. But yeah, she's really into cheese, and so she's kind of opened up my cheese experiences as well. But I would probably just like go basic. What I bought when I came home was Swiss cheese, which Swiss cheese is Swiss, but like we don't have Swiss cheese in Germany, not the way you have Swiss cheese here in the States. So I love a good piece of Swiss on my sandwich. But we also like a lot of different blue cheeses. And I love Scottish cheddar. Mm-hmm. Nice aged Scottish cheddar. We were just in Scotland a couple of months ago, and I think I made myself sick eating Scottish cheddar. So
they have a lot of interesting and good food in Scotland.
Yeah, they do. I also love haggis. So
it's very brave.
Some stuffed intestine any day.
Oh, my goodness. Well, so some questions just talking about the Bible, because not only are you familiar with world religions, but when we're talking about studying the Bible, were you someone who kind of grew up in the church, or did you have like a faith formation experience? Like, was there a moment where you were like, this is what I'm going to do with my life, is kind of be a theologian or be a pastor? What was that story like for you?
Yeah, a bit of a long story, but I'll try to keep it short. I was baptized in LCMS Church, so I've been Christian since a few months after my birth. But I think one of the key things in there is that my dad was baptized when I was 5 years old, or I was 4 years old. And so, I joke that I've been Christian longer than my father. And he kind of came in with this evangelical converted experience. He was super on fire, and I definitely benefited from that. But I also was estranged from a lot of that evangelical culture, and that's a lot of the stuff in the news these days, and people processing that. And that happened for me pretty early on, because I was dating my way through the world's religions. My friends were of different perspectives, and so I really kind of had a moment where, right after I was confirmed in a Lutheran church, I didn't come back to it for a while. And in high school, just kind of wandered around, checked different things out, and really wasn't loyal to any one particular religious tradition. Now that changed because of some good mentors in my life. I had a really great DCE who allowed for that exploration, while at the same time encouraging me to re-encounter my own tradition. And in that process then said, well, once I came back to the church, I said, wouldn't it be neat if I got to help others do that kind of exploration in a safe place, ask questions, learn about the world, but continue to come home to their faith tradition? And so then I went on to study to become a DCE at Concordia University, Irvine. And then they sent me to New Zealand for my internship, halfway across the world, and that gave me a whole new look on life, to be in a different place, different corner, different experiences. It's summertime when they do Christmas in New Zealand, weird stuff like that. And that just pushed me deeper and deeper into doing anthropology of different cultures, of different religions. But I've always come back to my own faith tradition. And I think my study of other religions is better because I'm so firm in my own faith.
So learning about other religions helped you to trust Christianity more as you experienced other cultures?
Yeah, in a way. I work a lot with Muslims. That's my primary community that I work with and study with and learn from. And just like Christians want to evangelize and tell people about their faith, my Muslim friends often tell me about their faith. And they're like, Ken, you know so much about Islam, you know so much about the Quran, and you know so much about our traditions, and why aren't you Muslim? And when I'm having honest conversations with them, I'll say, well, it's because I'm Christian, I'm really solidly Christian. I got a real good grounding in my faith, and I've learned so much, and I couldn't imagine being anything else. And it's no offense to these other people's religious traditions. I don't try to denigrate them. I don't try to create what's called straw men of them, kind of knock down the easy things that are easy to knock down in any tradition or any philosophy or any way of looking at the world. I really respect them for the beliefs they have, and don't see them as simple or stupid or easily disregarded. But for me, Christianity is my faith, it's my community, it's my tribe, it's my family, and so I couldn't imagine ever leaving that. Even though I may find things that I respect, find really interesting, or even sometimes am envious of in other religious traditions.
Interesting. And
Yeah.
it sounds like in your relationships, you aren't going out in a way to try to knock people down, but you're building friendships. And I think that's really important for us to have friends from all different places. One student asked this question. I thought this was really interesting. They said, I know there's a ton of similarities found in religions of the world, for example, global floods or a Messiah or a promised land. Could you think of some of examples of those, and how do you think these common threads came to be? It's kind of a broad question.
Yeah, I mean, I think when we tend to look at the religions of the world, it's very easy to get caught up in the differences. And there are very, very important differences. I mean, one of the things I often say is, my Muslim friends are Muslim, my Buddhist friends are Buddhist, I'm Christian. Let's not pretend, for anybody's sake, that we believe the same stuff. We don't. We have very different perspectives on God, humanity, and the fate of everyone who's ever lived. And to respect someone of a different faith is to say, yeah, your faith is different, my faith is different, but we can still have a relationship, we can still have connections. With that said, as your student knows, there are similarities in texts and traditions and rituals and actions, and that's because we're all human. We're all in search of a relationship with the divine and a relationship with one another. And so as humans, all created in the image of God, we've been given the same gifts, the same tools of cognition, of connection. And so we've kind of navigated different ways of doing religion, but they tend to do some similar things, tell some similar stories, because we have similar experiences, we have a shared earth. So all of these things that we have in common have produced a lot of similar actions. But I think what's really important when you go into religion is not necessarily to seek out what's in common, but to seek out what's different and to put that into conversation. Because in our world, we have to learn to deal with difference. And it's too easy when you go into dialogue with someone of a different religion to then just try to find the easy things that you share in common. But that's not real relationship. I mean, if you have a deep relationship with your best friend, or you have a girlfriend or a boyfriend, or later on a husband and wife or whatever, you know that the best relationships are those that have a little friction, or you had that argument and you got past it. And the relationship survived a difference. And that's the same when Christians encounter people of other religious traditions. Find the difference, but then work past it.
Talking about relationships and friendships, if you were to meet someone and they wanted to learn about Christianity, and you're going to have them maybe look at our text, which is the Bible, how would you recommend them going about that? Someone who's new to the faith or new to Christianity?
Yeah, I mean, if someone comes to me, I'm always very open to talk about my own faith and my own practice. And I think if someone came to me and they wanted to read the Bible, if that was their explicit question, then I would immediately invite them into some kind of community to do that in. And if there's a trusted relationship between us, then I would gladly do that with them and share some of my own story with it. Because as someone who studies human cultures, human communities, human societies, there's just kind of a principle out there that we belong before we believe. And we feel in connection with a community. We resonate with a people and a religious group, perhaps, before we say, I believe that. And even if we think we believe before we belong, we often have some type of relationship. And I think people can think back. Either you were born into it, so there's this whole web of familial relationships that you have, mom, dad, grandma, grandpa, generations of a certain kind of religion, or you had a friend, or you had a neighbor, or you had someone who was a connection point at some point in time into this faith community. And so I think it's really important as we share the Bible to not do like a hit and run with the Bible and just kind of like throw the Bible or like throw evangelism at somebody or throw our faith at somebody without the intention of building a relationship with that somebody as well. And I think that kind of pushes against a lot of the models that we've been taught about how to share our faith. And in a world where Christianity in the United States in particular is becoming less and less the religion that's in the majority, I think that becomes even more important to focus on the relationships and to see that as an opportunity to grow and build together. And you'll learn something about your own faith too, I think.
So for a lot of our students who come in and to our school, which is a Lutheran school, they've never really encountered Scripture before. To just give them a book of the Bible and say, go with this alone, that's not really the best model. We really need to be in communities or in churches or in Bible studies or groups or as a class so important for us to be communicating with each other and not just
Yeah.
alone
Yeah.
in Scripture.
Yeah, and then that gives you the opportunity to have more honest, open conversations, to wrestle with stuff together. And I don't try to hold back from my own like deep questions about the Bible when I'm reading with someone who is brand new to it, because they might have the same tough questions or doubts or issues or like, yeah, I don't understand that part either. And so I share that with them. I don't try to hold back. I don't try to, again, present the best version of Christianity. I'm like, yeah, this is it. This is Christianity, warts and all, and weird stuff too. Like, we are strange. And so let's try to make that more familiar for them. And if I can't be the one who's going to be in relationship with them, because that's not always possible, we can't always connect with everyone, we can't always spend time with everyone, we run out of time, then find somebody else who can walk along with them or connect them to another place. And that's particularly when you're traveling, and you're going across the world and you have that opportunity. You're probably not going to come back. You're probably not going to be able to move and live there. Maybe you would, but it's always good to connect them to a local community as well, because that's really where knowledge and faith will take root, is in a community of people.
Yeah, that's good. Something that we're talking about in our theology class right now is adversity and troubles that we face in this world. And one of my students wanted to know, in your journey as you're a journalist, as you're a professor, you're a pastor, what are some of the adversities that you faced that maybe helped you in your faith or maybe hurt you in your faith or in your experience?
Yeah. I mean, life is full of adversity. Life is hard, and there's all types of little ones. We were talking about culture shock, often mean the subtle things, and then there's big life events that happen. And I think some of the stuff I've already shared about in high school, kind of wandering around and dealing with those difficulties. They weren't big things. They were lots of little questions and little problems that I had that drove me deeper in the end into my faith, but at the same time deeper into relationship with others. And then, wearing these different hats, as you put it, as journalist, as professor, as pastor, there are people within my own Christian community that don't get what I do and have a real problem with the fact that I spend time with Muslims and Buddhists, and I learn from them, and I talk with them, and I respect them for who they are and what they believe, even if I have major differences with them. And then, on the other hand, too, there are some who I'm in dialogue with across religious traditions who are sometimes offended by the fact that I have a firm faith tradition. I have a confession that I share. And so it's always kind of walking in between. There's this classic literature book, maybe you read it at your school, Beowulf. So a classic one. And there are these people called the border walkers, these people who are walking along the borders, and they're not quite in this kingdom, they're not quite in this kingdom. They're somewhere in between. And I like to think of myself as a border walker, as someone who's walking on different borders of different professions, of different communities, connecting with people in both places. And that's hard, but I think increasingly in our world where diversity and difference are going to become more and more the norm, we're all going to have to become border walkers. We're all going to have to deal with the adversity of not agreeing with our neighbor and not having the same look at the world. And I think we shouldn't be afraid of that adversity. I mixed adversity and diversity then, and I don't think that was a mistake.
My students do that as well. It's very common.
Adversity and diversity, we shouldn't avoid that because that's good stuff.
Yeah.
That's where the good stuff comes from. What I like to call them is generative frictions. So, adversity and disagreements and differences that produce new things, new ways of looking at the world, new relationships, new connections, and perhaps new conversations as well.
What would be some advice that you would give to a student who is learning about these things? What are some things that you put into practice that helped you grow as a student or grow as a theologian?
Yeah, I come back to something that one of my seminary professors taught me about reading and interpreting the Bible, which is keep your look in the book and your feet in the streets. And I like that one as kind of a life axiom and not only a theological axiom, but like just how to live life. And that is, study hard, engage with the text that you're given, engage with the traditions that you're learning and the topics that you're being invited into, but always still live life and try to connect life with what you're learning and find your conversation partners and then learn how to read a book. I think we always think we know how to read. Yes, we know how to read letters that are combined into words, that are combined into sentences, that are combined into paragraphs, et cetera, et cetera. But there are better ways to read books, and there are less better ways to read books. And so if you really want to read a lot on a topic, you're going to have to learn how to read a book. And I think you have a video about that. And so, you know, I'll plug that.
I do try to teach my students. Yeah.
Thank
you.
Yeah, but learning how to read a book is fantastic, because then, yeah, the world is open to you. There's so much that you can read. There's so much that you can encounter. And again, I'm flabbergasted that I get to do both. I get to read hundreds of books all the time. That's my life. But then at the same time, I get to talk to hundreds of people and learn about the chapters of their lives and do both at the same time, keeping my look in books, but also my feet in the streets, connecting with others.
Well, so how could my students keep in touch with you? What are some ways, like, where are you if they wanted to learn more about what you're writing and working on?
Yeah, I'm one of those ridiculous people that has a website that is myname.com. So they can go to kenchitwood.com, the world we live in. They can check things out there, and that has my social media. I'm not hip enough to have things like TikTok, but I'm on Instagram, I'm on Twitter, and I'm on that old thing called Facebook. And yeah, you can connect with me there. And I love receiving emails, notices, messages from people, questions they have, conversations they want to kick off. And I look forward to perhaps having that with some of your students if they'd like to.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So maybe if we have some questions, we can send an email and learn more about the world that we live in. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, of course. It was fun to do this.